Welcome again to another episode of Project Cancer. We have again someone here who is has been a patient as a cancer sufferer, if that's the right term, who I've known for about 7 or 8 years, lives in the locality here near Cambridge, and we're just going to talk through what happened to Ludo and what he's learned from it and what hopefully he can tell others. So Ludo, hello.
Hello Peter. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, so I can't remember when we met, probably about 8 years ago, and then suddenly, I don't know, about 3 years after that, you contacted me to say that you were seriously ill with cancer.
Yeah.
So talk us through what happened, please.
The journey.
The journey, as I call it.
I was perfectly healthy. I was exercising 3 or 4 times a week. I felt completely normal. And one night I discovered a lump under my armpit. And I thought, is this just a gland? I ignored it for about 3 days. Then it got larger. So I went to my doctor and said, I've got this lump under my arm, what should I do?
How big was it?
It was about that big, about an inch possibly at the end.
Yeah.
And I was concerned. And the doctor said, I think it's just a gland come up because you're not well. And I said, I'm perfectly well, so it can't be. And he said, well, keep an eye on it and come back in a week. So I went back in a week, and by that time another one had appeared on my testicle. And I was seriously concerned. They didn't even look at my testicle. They again said, it's just a gland problem, don't worry about it. We'll set you up a scan at the Stevenage Hospital in 6 weeks' time. And I said, that seems an awfully long way away, considering I'm getting lumps all over my body. No, it'll be fine. So another lump appeared under my other armpit, and I said, this is getting very concerning, can you speed up the process? No, they didn't speed up the process. So I waited for 6 weeks, went for a scan, and the person doing the scan, my wife was with me, came out of the room after the scan had been done and said, could your wife come in please? So my wife came out, was very nervous about that. And he said, who's your GP? And I told him who my GP was. And he said, this is very serious, we've got to get you into Adam Brooks tomorrow, and we need you to see a specialist. So at this point they thought it was testicular cancer. So they took me to the clinic. The clinic said, yes, it may be. We suggest you have a testicle removed, which I did after about 2 weeks. Then I went back and they said, actually, we think it's something different. We think it could be something else. We now need to do a CT scan. They did a CT scan.
But they haven't done it at this point. What had they had scanned?
They had various scans of types, but not a CT scan.
Not the whole thing.
No.
They haven't done the torso.
No.
Okay.
So this is sort of 10 to 11 weeks in. And I'm feeling worse about it mentally, but physically I felt totally normal.
So you point out this is well before COVID, so it wasn't...
Well before COVID, absolutely. Yeah. And I then was transferred to the haematology department, and they said, we think you may have something else, so we're going to recommend a CT scan. Did the CT scan, we went back in and said, yes, we think you've got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and we'd like you to do outpatient chemotherapy, and we think we can deal with it. So just before we do that, we'd like you to have a PET scan because we need a bit more detail.
Which is a CT with dye of some kind,
yes,
isn't it?
they inject dye in you, and sort of nuclear dye, I think it is.
Okay.
And that came back, and it was much, much worse than it was first thought to be, and I was stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he said, look, this is very serious, we need to get you in for treatment immediately, and you're going to be given the worst treatment possible.
So we use those words.
Exactly those words. And I had to go through a health check to see whether I was physically able to resist it and to survive the treatment they gave me. So rather than being an outpatient, I became an inpatient. So for 36 days, I was given chemotherapy every day of that period. Infusion through various types. And literally, he said, we'll throw every piece of chemotherapy at you that we possibly can, including lumbar punctures every 5 days to prevent it going to my brain, which was the most painful experience I've ever.
It's where they drill into the spine, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's just, they take a little marker pen and put a note and try and get it in there, and it missed a couple of times and was the most...
Between the discs.
The discs, yeah. Oh, it's agony. Yeah. So I was in hospital for a 36-day period, then I had a 2-week respite back at home, and then the whole thing repeated again. But after that period of the first 36 days, they showed me the pre and the post scan at the PET level. And my body, if you imagine the targets that people go to at gun ranges, my body was literally hot throughout the entire, from top to toe.
With tumours?
With tumours.
What sort of size? Had you any
It was
clue?
varying sizes all over my body, but it was just like a heat map of cancer.
And what were they in? What in tissue or in the lymph system or?
In the lymph system, maybe.
Yeah.
But I mean, I had lumps on my head coming up as I was talking to the doctors.
Really? Under the skin?
Oh
Between
yeah,
the scalp?
absolutely, yeah. So I was, but the thing I would, recommend to everybody, I went in with a very, very positive nature. I was fit. I continued to exercise until I was debilitated, so I couldn't. But I remained positive. I said I'd get out the other side. I trusted the doctor. Lots of alternative therapies from my sister who had cancer was, suggested to me, and I said no, absolutely not.
As in what? Diet and things?
Diet and yoga and
Okay.
all. And I said, look, he's told me that I've got very little time to live. If I don't take it, I'm going to take it and hit it hard.
Mm.
Which I think to this day is the right thing to do. It was very unpleasant and horrible, but here I am 5 years later, 6 years later, and I'm totally fit and well.
And what were was it non-Hodgkin's?
It was non
And the
Hodgkin's
chemo
stage.
was, presumably some of it was targeted at that, but,
Yeah.
but you said it was more than that, so...
Just everything they could throw at me, they threw at me. I can't remember the exact things: yellow stuff, green stuff, red stuff. It was horrible.
Do you think this was a trial, or was it, I mean, there is a point where they can't move too far away from their
No.
rules.
I think he'd done it before
Okay.
with success.
Yeah.
And I would like to mention Dr. Follows at Addenbrooke's Hospital.
Follows, is that?
Follows.
Yeah.
Follows. No, Dr. Follows,
Yeah.
who was incredibly kind to me. He, at one point, because of the 2 stages, I was in a ward for 36 days and I had this break, and then they put me into a different ward, and I rang him up and said, look, I don't really want to go on the different ward. I've got fantastic relationships with the nurses and I feel comfortable there and safe. And he went out of his way to get me a bed back in there and move people around for my benefit. So he and the nurses at Addenbrooke's could not have done more for me. And however horrendous chemotherapy was, and it made me completely lose everything, my hair, my appetite. If I smelled food coming down the corridor, I was sick. So at the end, I literally wasn't eating. I was just having drinks.
And you're fairly slender compared with
Yeah.
me, so you
I
haven't
lost,
got a lot to
I lost
lose.
2 stone.
Yeah.
But the hospital was just wonderful, and throughout it I was positive, they were positive, and it all looked very positive throughout the
And
treatment.
then you had regular scans to check.
Regular
everything out,
scans throughout, yeah.
So at what point do they decide that you've had enough chemo?
Once they cleared everything from my scan,
Right.
and that was after the second phase of 36 days,
Yeah. Okay.
and it was the most joyous moment I've ever had.
Yeah. And at that point then, there was, as we talked about in the different podcasts, there's a difference between no evidence of disease and no measurable disease.
Yeah.
They couldn't tell whether there's an evidence where they made that all the tumours
Absolutely.
disappeared.
Yeah, completely.
That's astonishing. So effectively, 72 days plus some other bits.
Yeah, and then I had I had some post therapy as well, so I had to go back occasionally for, I can't even remember what it was, but more stuff through my arm.
Yeah.
And that cleared the lot.
Right.
But what the most frightening piece was whether it was going to go to my brain, and that's why, although it was so unpleasant, having those lumbar punctures was actually a saviour.
And because the chemo they were using wouldn't have worked in the brain,
Yeah,
is that right?
they wanted it to go directly.
Whereas the targeted therapy I'm on actually does go through the
Yeah.
blood-brain barrier.
Yeah.
Okay. So how is it? So lymphoma means it's transferred via the lymph system.
Yeah.
So it was moving around the lymph system.
Yeah. Rapidly.
Yes. No idea of any trigger. Just
None at all. They have no idea.
No.
No idea at all.
Okay. And then since then you have scans on once a year or so.
I had, in the first year, I had them every 6 months, and then once a year, and now they've stopped. So I'm no longer with a
Really?
doctor, which actually makes me feel a bit insecure. And I think if anyone's watching that's going to have to go through this, it is very insecure. And the security of having those scans
Yeah.
and a doctor on call at any point you want when you get a scare was invaluable, and they are truly helpful. So I'd phone up and say, oh, I'm not feeling good, what is it? And I'm panicking. And they'd phone me back within 24 hours, get me in, scan me, check me, and it was wonderful.
And so it's not likely to come back, otherwise they would carry on scanning even if infrequently.
They said there's a 95% chance it won't come back.
And so they're not even going to look for the 5% chance. Perhaps you should, if you can afford it, pay for a patient scan yourself.
I may well do that, and I've got private healthcare insurance.
Oh, you have?
Yeah,
Okay. So
purely
you
for
could-
that reason,
yeah,
so
okay.
that if I have anything, I can go back.
Yeah.
But Dr. Follow said if ever anything happened, just call him and he'll be on the case.
Brilliant. And so when did Dr. Fuller get into the picture? Because he obviously had this difficult time with the GP, and then
he got involved once they realised it wasn't testicular cancer, and it was transferred across and realised it was blood cancer.
okay.
So he then became the lead consultant for me at Adam Brooks.
Right. Okay.
And the nicest man I've ever met. He's like a Duracell bunny. He's got so much energy. He's obviously a leader in his field, and we're very lucky having Adam Brooks on our doorstep.
Yes, we are. Exactly.
So that was a huge advantage, and I think that's a privilege we have.
And did you get, as you know, the reason we are here is
Yeah.
because I've approached this in the way of learning more from
Yeah.
others and giving back. Did you do any Googling or anything, or how much did you know?
Well,
how much were you frightened?
my wife is a nurse, so she knew, and previously was a cancer nurse, so she knew much more than she should, if you like.
Sure. Did she tell you that or not?
She was wonderful. I mean,
Yeah.
you talked about care and what mattered to me, and her support of me was incredible. But the knowledge she had was quite frightening.
And did she share that or not?
No.
Okay.
But I could, when we had that first consultation, he said, "This is very serious. We need to get you in a hospital now." I saw her face drop,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, this is serious
Yes,
then, because
yeah.
her face doesn't drop often.
Right. Okay.
So, but she was incredibly supportive. Didn't frighten me with anything.
Right.
Just, and my children were wonderful.
Yeah.
But the nurses in the hospital were just fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. And I've stayed in touch with 2 or 3
Yeah.
of them
Oh, brilliant.
and watched their careers blossom. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you? I can't remember when you told me. I think you were in hospital at the time. So it
I
must have
was.
been a few, maybe 3 or 4 weeks or something after.
I think it was about 2 weeks in,
Was it okay?
when I was still feeling as if I was a man that was going to fight it and
Okay.
not suffer at all.
Right.
So I felt good. I was still doing some work,
Yeah.
trying to keep my business going because I was working for myself. I just started a new business.
Yeah.
So it was all a bit frightening what was going to happen to that.
And how did you work through who to tell when? Obviously, your wife and kids would know immediately, but
My wife and kids knew, and we kept it to a very small circle of friends. We
Yeah.
didn't post on Facebook. We didn't do any of that. We
Yeah.
just kept it very private. Jo, my wife, received phone calls from people, but didn't dwell on them.
yes.
Kept it very much within our inner circle of close friends.
Yes. Okay.
And I had some wonderful friends visiting me all the time, so that was a fillip for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
And without that, I don't think I'd have coped.
Yes. So generally, your experience with the NHS was the initial stages with the GP was very dissatisfactory.
Yes, and I think I understand how under pressure GPs are and what a wealth of knowledge they need to have to diagnose every possible thing that's coming into them. But in this instance, I think they behave very badly. I never complain, so I don't ever want to complain against the NHS. I personally complained, but I didn't want to do it formally because I care about the GP practices, and I think they do an amazing job, but I just wish they'd picked it up earlier. And I think had they done that, I wouldn't have had to go into hospital as an inpatient.
So it would have been outpatient every second or third week. Okay. And how much? I mean, you can't tell this, can you? How fast it was growing and whether, because you ended up with 36 individual days of it, which is, if you're going once every 2 weeks, the equivalent of 72 weeks, isn't it? A year and a half.
Yeah.
I mean, that is
It was
a lot of stuff
growing.
thrown at you.
He said it was growing. I mean, he couldn't believe. After the first consultation, then I went in for my health check to see whether I could cope with the chemotherapy. And in between, so that was one day, and then I went to see him again. And in that one day, 3 lumps had appeared on my head. So it was that rapid. It was literally everywhere over my body.
How did they need to work out what sort of tumour it was or not? Did they take a biopsy at some point?
They took a biopsy and looked at that.
By taking a piece of tumour from somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay. And was it unusual that, or usual?
No,
No.
It was just very, very far on, if you like, so stage 4 and getting worse every second.
Yes.
Hence why I went straight in and had the inpatient chemotherapy. Right. And I was in a leukemia ward, so the other thing that was incredible was there were people around me in much worse state than I was. And that actually kept me going.
Okay.
Because I sort of took the role of caring for them and keeping them going when they were at the end of their tether. And you know, with a certain scientific background and a good network of scientific people, I was encouraged. I mean, one guy next to me was, you know, they'd run out of treatments for him, and I said, just go and find trials. Get them to go and find trials of anything you possibly can. So I encouraged him.
Did he do that?
And he did, and I mean, I don't know what happened to be honest. But, so that was another sort of thing I did to keep my spirits up, was to not think about myself, think about others. And that really helped.
Yes. So how do you approach life at the moment in terms of planning? I'm in a slightly different state because I'm expecting mutation to occur sometime soon, possibly. Who knows? I've already been given 16 months, and some people aren't given any time at all on this treatment. So how do you plan and prioritise?
Well, it's interesting because when I lost my wife to a horrible disease, and I learned from that if you wake up in the morning and the person next to you is still alive, that's the best day of your life.
Right.
And I live my life like that. If I wake up in the morning and I'm still alive and healthy and I haven't got anything wrong with me, that's all I want.
Right.
So I live from day to day, but I'm certainly winding down my work, continuing to exercise as much as I can. But that's not working at the moment, so I'm working very hard, probably too hard.
Well, you're probably like me, it's very difficult to say no if it's an interesting people with an interesting role to be given. So,
exactly, so I'm still working a lot. And I enjoy that, and I think keeping going is really important. And I, post all the treatment, I went back to work probably much too early, but in the hindsight, I think it was exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Stopped me being maudlin and sorry for myself and just got me on and working.
Yeah.
But it was exhausting, absolutely exhausting, but I loved it.
So I can't imagine how difficult it must have been because A, you lost 2 stone, B, you atrophied your muscles and everything in those many weeks there. And you'd be tired. How on earth did you push yourself to not fall asleep during a presentation or something?
Well, I almost as soon as I came out of hospital, however debilitated I was, I started walking every day, 2 or 3 times a day, just small distances, and then increasing that, and then started to do a bit of exercise, and that got me stronger and stronger. But it was just sheer bloody determination that got me through it, and the fact that it was my own livelihood. My business I'd only just started it before I got cancer, and therefore I really need to push it to get back on the working pattern I wanted. So it was just determination.
Wow. Okay. Anything else that you feel that our audience might want to hear from your journey?
As I said before, I think the positive nature of your attitude is really important.
Difficult to create that, isn't it?
It is incredibly difficult.
I've known you always as a positive, like me, I'm positive.
Exactly.
Really
it is very difficult, and there were down times when I was feeling really, really horrible, but I always had the end game in mind, and Dr. Follows always said, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, and I trusted him. So I think, positivity is really important. I think even if you haven't got an illness right now, being healthy definitely saved me.
Yeah.
Had I not been exercising prior to getting it, I wouldn't have survived that chemotherapy, and they're certain about that.
Right.
Because I was physically very, very fit. Yeah. And I think that's really important. And I had a good diet, and everything was looking good.
Yeah.
So.
And a great support network, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, friends like yourself and all my close friends, kept in touch, and it was always a joy to get messages. And But keeping it private, I don't know. I see people on Facebook sharing, and not me at all.
But I haven't done that. Did I ever give you access to my private blog?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. So that was private, and that was on my website. It was behind a password, and it was only after about 9 or 10 months when things were looking better that I started to be more public about it. And although I've occasionally put it on Strava, which is a running app, a social running app, until I set up Project Cancer, I've kept it also fairly quiet.
So I think that's important. I think it made it easier for me.
Yeah.
And certainly made it easier for Jo, that she wasn't inundated with loads and loads of people contacting her. So we kept it very quiet.
Yes, that's the issue, is the more you tell, the more they want to know. And
absolutely.
Which is why I set up that private blog, to save me
having
to have lots of conversations, because there are other things to do in life.
Exactly. And Jo was inundated even with family, and it got to a point where she said, look, just phone me once a week, and if anything changes, I'll call you.
Yes.
Because it was very, very tiring for her, just constantly having to talk about it when she didn't really want to.
Yeah.
And she, to her credit, never took a day off work.
Yes. Because you were never in a crisis, were you, I suppose?
No. The crisis was at the beginning, and the crisis, as soon as the treatment started, I felt we're on the path to save you here.
Yeah, we won't mention his surname, but there's a guy you might know in Cambridge called Paul, who's had a 10 or 11 year journey, and he's still in the middle of it. Yeah. And he had a number of crises,
which is
A&E, Christmas Eve, A&E in the morning, in the middle of the night and things like that. So.
I did have that when I went, because this sort of phase thing where you had these 36 days and then a break in between. If my blood count, so we're checking my blood count every day, and it went way below
Yeah.
white cells, and they rushed me into hospital, and I got an infection. And so, yeah, there were crises to that level, but it was always not major crises.
Yes, and kept you in for...
Just kept me in overnight and then
Oh,
just shut me out the next day. Go back and keep going.
Well, thank you very much, Ludo. That's
You're
been
very
really
welcome.
fascinating. I've learned more, and hopefully the audience will learn more from this. And so thank you very much for
Thank
listening.
you.
Thank you.